What if the real front lines in this war are not muddy trenches, but flickering power grids and fractured supply lines? What if the fate of nations is decided not by tanks and guns, but by silent disruptions in the darkness? When the hum of daily life abruptly stops and a city's heartbeat stutters to silence. As the world focuses on shifting battle maps across Ukraine, something deeper is unfolding beneath the headlines. In the Zaporizhzhia region, Russian forces are making slow but relentless progress, breaching defenses once thought untouchable. Yet, these territorial gains are only part of a broader, more dangerous campaign. Night after night, Ukrainian cities plunge into darkness. Precision strikes target substations and transmission lines, not as mere collateral, but as deliberate attacks designed to break the backbone of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Each blackout sends shockwaves through daily life, crippling logistics, cutting communications, and sapping the nation's will to fight, or even function. Consider a single night in Kyiv, the capital. Families gathered for dinner are interrupted by an air raid siren. Moments later, the entire block is swallowed in pitch black. Elevators stall mid-floor. Hospitals scramble to switch to backup generators. Children huddle under blankets as the temperature inside drops. For millions, this is not an isolated incident, but a relentless new normal. Beneath every news alert lies a systematic strategy. The real objective is not only to seize land, but to dismantle the systems that keep a country alive: electricity, supply chains, and the shared sense of hope. The war has spilled far beyond the range of artillery, infiltrating invisible networks that hold societies together. If we mistake this for a traditional conflict, we risk missing the bigger picture, and with it, the vulnerabilities in our own lives. This is no longer just a military struggle. It is a prolonged contest of resilience, adaptation, and survival, fought in places most people never witness. But this transformation is not happening in isolation. As the fighting escalates, so do the political and economic tensions rippling out from Ukraine into the wider world. Barely a month ago, the Zaporizhzhia line looked invulnerable. Now, the ground has shifted beneath both armies, echoing historic moments where seemingly impregnable lines suddenly gave way. Think of the Maginot Line in France during World War II, an engineering marvel that was ultimately outflanked, leaving its defenders in shock. In Ukraine, similar illusions of safety have been shattered. Russian forces have breached the Yancho River, pushing through Ukrainian defenses that many believed would never fall. They have seized crucial settlements, Pervomaiskaya among them, methodically expanding their grip both north and south of the river. This advance has compressed Ukrainian positions, placing vital supply routes in immediate jeopardy and threatening to sever the lifelines for ammunition and reinforcements. Within these tightening lines, Ukrainian defenders find themselves trapped in a shrinking pocket. With every kilometer lost, their choices dwindle. Hold the sliver of ground between the Yanchur and Gaichur rivers, or retreat to the fallback defenses around Guliai-Polye. Each decision carries heavy risk. Pulling back leaves the city exposed. Staying risks encirclement and total isolation, especially as Russian troops threaten entry points like Vumtras, Zhelezna, and Avtomobilna. This scenario mirrors countless historical encirclements, from the German army's attempts to pocket Soviet forces at Stalingrad to the Korean War's battles at the Pusan perimeter. In each case, defenders faced brutal choices: fight on against the odds, attempt desperate evacuations, or risk total annihilation. This dramatic shift did not emerge overnight. It is the outcome of months of Russian planning, intelligence gathering, and calculated exploitation of Ukrainian weaknesses, vulnerabilities left after Ukrainian brigades redeployed north during the summer. In flashpoints such as Malaya Tokmachka, Russian breakthroughs were not sudden. They were the result of patient probing, relentless pressure, and swift strikes once cracks appeared. Ukrainian lines that had held for weeks crumbled in mere hours, as reserves thinned and response times faltered. Where outside analysts once saw a stable front, Russian command saw a window of opportunity. Their intelligence units tracked Ukrainian movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When it came, coordinated assaults, bolstered by new precision weaponry, overwhelmed defenders forced to cover multiple axes. Now, with gains measured in kilometers rather than meters, the southern front is transforming before our eyes. To put this in perspective, imagine a chess game where your opponent sacrifices pieces to lure you away from the center, then strikes hard at your king. Ukraine's decision to shift troops north left the southern flank exposed, and Russia's patient reconnaissance paid off. Military history is replete with such feints and counter-moves, from Hannibal's encirclement at Cannae to the Allied landings in Normandy, which succeeded partly by convincing the enemy to expect an attack elsewhere. Control of these contested settlements and the supply lines that sustain them will determine more than just who holds territory. Resources, lives, and strategic influence hang in the balance. The consequences will ripple far beyond a single riverbank or village. The battle's outcome stands to reshape the region and send shockwaves across the globe. Yet, these territorial gains are only one aspect of the campaign. An even more pivotal struggle is unfolding, one waged not in trenches, but in the shadows. As the front lines shift, a new offensive takes shape, one targeting Ukraine's infrastructure and morale as much as its soldiers. The war's next phase will be defined by strikes, sabotage, and the unseen battles shaping the nation's fate. A city can be defended with walls and soldiers, but what happens when the lights vanish, water stops running, and factories go silent? Across Ukraine, sweeping waves of coordinated strikes have left power plants, substations, and critical infrastructure in ruins. The fight is no longer just for territory. It is now a contest for basic survival. Entire regions, Kyiv among them, are plunged into darkness as blackouts ripple unpredictably from city to city. The assault is systematic. Russian barrages of missiles and drones have battered port terminals, shredded energy grids, and crippled assembly lines for both military and civilian goods. This is not only a blow to the front lines. It is a direct attack on the nation's lifeblood, choking off weapons, fuel, and food. Every shattered power station is a new wound, bleeding resources and hope. Factories that once operated around the clock now stand gutted and silent. Drone plants and armored vehicle depots, once Ukraine's engine of resistance, are reduced to scorched shells. Each lost facility is more than a tactical setback. It is a crack in the morale of workers and soldiers alike. The psychological toll is profound. Families huddle in freezing, darkened apartments, uncertain if heat, water, or communication will return. In these moments, fear spreads faster than shrapnel. Trust in government flickers with every blackout. If the promise of safety can vanish overnight, what else might collapse? Economically, the damage is devastating. Idle factories mean no work, no exports, and no income. Port cities, vital for both trade and supplies, endure relentless bombardment. For many, the loss of a livelihood becomes as crushing as the threat of invasion itself. This is hybrid warfare at full tilt, a campaign that strikes at both flesh and spirit. Russia's strategy blends brute force with deprivation, aiming not only to break defenses, but to sap Ukraine's will to persevere. The war is fought not just on maps, but in minds. To understand the full impact, consider the siege of Leningrad during World War II, where starvation and deprivation were wielded as weapons, killing more through cold and hunger than through bullets or shells. The modern context is different. There are more advanced technologies, more international eyes watching, but the logic is the same. Wear down the fabric of resistance until it unravels. The gravest danger is not simply losing ground, but watching society unravel. As homes go cold and routines shatter, the social fabric frays. If morale breaks and trust dissolves, resistance can fail long before the front lines do. Yet, as explosions echo across the land and the power grid teeters, another battle unfolds in quieter corridors, a contest of politics and diplomacy, where the next move could decide the fate of nations. While Ukraine endures relentless attacks at home, the struggle for international support takes on new urgency. Alliances, negotiations, and shifting policies abroad now threaten to shape the conflict's outcome as much as any weapon. Sanctions, cancelled summits, and hardline rhetoric. What are these maneuvers truly accomplishing? Diplomatic tensions are running high. In a move that jolted both allies and adversaries, former President Donald Trump abruptly called off a planned meeting with Vladimir Putin. Mere hours later, the United States announced a new set of sanctions against Russia, reinforcing that economic pressure and political spectacle remain central to the Western strategy. Moscow's answer was immediate and unyielding. Russian officials declared an end to so-called diplomatic niceties, signaling that the period of polite engagement has closed. Official communications have sharpened. Both sides are embracing more confrontational language and actions. The shift is unmistakable. Russia now treats open antagonism and direct measures as its default diplomatic stance. Sanctions, once believed capable of crippling Russia's economy, have instead driven adaptation. Moscow is channeling resources into domestic production, reshaping logistics, and expanding partnerships with nations across Asia and the global South. Rather than collapse, Russia has weathered many of the intended shocks, confounding Western expectations and prompting a reassessment of pressure tactics. This echoes the experience of historical sanctions regimes. From Cuba's decades-long embargo to Iran's shifting black markets, nations under pressure often find inventive ways to endure and even thrive, building parallel economies or seeking new partners. For Russia, the pivot to new markets mirrors China's response to earlier Western trade restrictions, where economic isolation fostered domestic innovation and alternative alliances. Meanwhile, Western leaders still call for ceasefires and negotiations. Yet to Moscow, such offers are viewed as tactical delays, meant to buy precious time for Ukraine, not as authentic roads to peace. Russian officials cite repeated breaches of past agreements, bolstering their argument that dialogue is simply another battlefield in this broader conflict. These changes are rippling through Western capitals and media coverage. Only recently, news outlets heralded imminent Ukrainian breakthroughs. Now, a new lexicon has emerged: strategic pause, regrouping, and stalemate. The narrative has shifted from promises of swift victory to acknowledgments of a long, grinding contest, with no clear conclusion in sight. But the impact goes further than public statements. Russia's deepening diplomatic isolation is pushing it toward new alliances outside the Western sphere. Economic adaptation is stoking fresh resolve in Moscow. At the same time, both sides escalate psychological tactics. Propaganda, disinformation, and information control have become as vital as tanks or missiles on the front lines. Consider, for example, how both Russian and Ukrainian social media are flooded with competing stories, doctored images, and viral rumors. In World War I, the British blockade of Germany led to hunger and unrest. Today, the blockade is digital and psychological, with global narratives fighting for dominance. The battlefield is everywhere, from state TV broadcasts to the smartphone in your pocket. Yet, the gravest danger lies in misreading these signals. For decision-makers, the public, and international observers, misunderstanding these shifts could mean squandering opportunities to de-escalate, or worse, clinging to comforting illusions about the war's trajectory. As the boundaries between battlefield, economy, and diplomacy dissolve, one urgent question remains. What lessons can we extract before this new era of multidimensional conflict changes everything? The fog of war is no longer limited to the trenches. It now clouds economic forecasts, policy debates, and even the information we trust. In this new era of conflict, patience and calculated preparation often outweigh brute force. Modern wars, like the one unfolding in Ukraine, rarely reach decisive conclusions in mere days or weeks. Instead, they become protracted struggles of attrition, where each side maneuvers to outlast the other, exposing hidden weaknesses and testing every link in the chain of support. Victory is no longer defined solely by territory seized or cities captured. The true battleground lies in the invisible networks underpinning daily life: energy grids, communication nodes, and vital supply lines. A single blackout or a sabotaged rail junction can tip the balance of an entire campaign, leaving entire regions vulnerable. The contest for control extends beyond front lines, echoing in the flicker of city lights and the rumble of fuel trucks in the night. In Zaporizhzhia and across Ukraine, Russia's new approach reveals the strategic power of slow, methodical advances. Rather than risking everything for rapid, headline-grabbing breakthroughs, Russian forces focus on incremental progress, systematically dismantling the infrastructure that keeps Ukraine's war effort alive. Each bridge destroyed, each supply convoy intercepted, steadily erodes their opponent's ability to fight back. This strategy recalls the Allied bombing campaigns of World War II, where the destruction of German railways and factories was intended to grind down resistance over months and years, not hours or days. In the Vietnam War, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was relentlessly targeted in an effort to choke off supplies, an indirect battle that proved as decisive as any firefight. Yet the struggle is not confined to missiles and armored columns. The battle for perception and resolve is just as fierce. Both sides wield propaganda, psychological operations, and sophisticated disinformation campaigns, aiming to fracture morale, sow confusion, and keep their own populations committed. In this arena, truth itself becomes a weapon, with narratives shaping reality and influencing decisions as forcefully as any artillery strike. As winter approaches, the stakes grow even higher. Bitter cold and dwindling resources will test the endurance of soldiers and civilians alike and expose the adaptability or rigidity of their leaders. The side that best endures the relentless grind, physically, economically, and psychologically, will gain the upper hand as the conflict drags on. During the siege of Sarajevo in the 1990s, it was not the artillery barrages alone, but the loss of heat, water, and electricity through endless winter months that broke many. In Leningrad, it was the lack of bread, not bullets, that proved deadliest. The parallels are stark. In Ukraine, as in past sieges, resilience is measured not just by battlefield heroics, but by the ability to survive in darkness and deprivation. For the world watching, the lesson is stark. Failure to adapt to this evolving landscape of war risks not only military setbacks, but also economic shock and social instability. The shape of modern conflict is changing, demanding new strategies where endurance, adaptation, and information dominance may prove even more decisive than the mightiest weapon. So what practical steps could a nation, or an individual, take in the face of such multidimensional threats? First, diversify energy sources. Ukraine's efforts to rebuild power lines, import generators, and decentralize the grid are examples of resilience in action. During the Blitz in London, families installed blackout curtains, built shelters, and created neighborhood networks to share resources, a model for civilian adaptation. Second, invest in reliable communications. Radio networks, backup internet systems, and even old-fashioned community bulletin boards can keep information flowing when digital channels are disrupted. Estonia, after suffering a massive cyber attack in 2007, built a robust digital defense and backup systems, a practical blueprint for any nation under threat. Third, nurture social cohesion. Community kitchens, volunteer brigades, and mutual aid networks build trust and help people weather hardship. In Finland, the concept of sisu, a cultural stoicism and determination, enabled the country to resist Soviet invasion against overwhelming odds. Ukraine's vibrant civil society, from grassroots aid groups to tech volunteers, has proven to be a strategic asset. Fourth, counter disinformation with transparency. Governments and media must work together to rapidly debunk falsehoods and provide accurate updates. Sweden's Cold War-era total defense model trained citizens in crisis response and critical thinking, making society less vulnerable to panic or propaganda. Fifth, maintain psychological support. Hotlines, counseling services, and safe spaces for children are as vital as ammunition dumps. After Hurricane Katrina, community centers in New Orleans became sanctuaries for traumatized residents, reminders that psychological recovery is as important as material relief. Sixth, plan for economic continuity. Mobile banking, distributed supply chains, and local manufacturing help keep basic commerce alive. During the COVID-19 pandemic, nations that quickly adapted their economies, shifting to remote work, local food production, and online services, proved more resilient in the face of prolonged disruption. The pressure on Ukraine's home front is mounting, not only from physical attacks, but from a campaign designed to wear down national resolve. The next phase will reveal whether Ukraine and its allies can adapt quickly enough to withstand this multidimensional assault. The outcome of this war will not hinge on a single battle, but on thousands of interwoven moves, each echoing far beyond the front lines. To draw a parallel, think of a grand chess tournament, where victory is determined by foresight, adaptability, and the ability to recover from setbacks, not by a single spectacular move. Modern conflict is no longer just about armies clashing or borders shifting. Now, every advance in Zaporizhzhia, every night Ukraine spends without power, and every diplomatic standoff is a strand in a web that stretches across continents. The strikes on infrastructure, the tightening Western sanctions, and the relentless maneuvers on the battlefield all signal the same truth. This war has become multidimensional. Territory still matters, but so do supply chains, energy flows, and the war for information. When fuel convoys are ambushed and cities go dark, it is not only soldiers who suffer, morale cracks, and the will to resist starts to waver. Sanctions, broken summits, and covert negotiations are not mere background noise. They are weapons in their own right, slowly redrawing the limits of what either side can hope to achieve. Complacency is the real danger now. Clinging to outdated rules or expecting a swift resolution ignores how completely the playbook has changed. Russia's grinding push in the south, Ukraine's urgent counterattacks, and the West's strategic recalibrations all point to a chilling reality. This is a test of endurance, where every choice, military, political, or psychological, reverberates in unpredictable ways. The fog of war in this era is thicker than ever. Misinformation moves at the speed of light, shaping perceptions before facts can catch up. Propaganda campaigns are as potent as artillery barrages. Economic aftershocks and energy shortages ripple far beyond Kyiv or Moscow, touching homes and markets from Berlin to Boston. To grasp what is at stake, it is no longer enough to follow the obvious headlines. Understanding the layers beneath is vital, because global security, economic stability, and even daily routines can shift with a single, unseen move. In the coming weeks and months, the world will watch for dramatic breakthroughs. But the true struggle will be decided by countless decisions, sacrifices, and pressure points, many hidden from view. Every move matters now, and every player, seen or unseen, is part of the game. So, as the lights flicker and the headlines swirl, remember this. In the wars of the 21st century, the real front lines may be drawn in the shadows. To meet these challenges, nations and individuals alike must learn, adapt, and endure, because the outcome will shape not just the fate of Ukraine, but the balance of power, security, and hope for generations to come.